Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video, and for my final video of the year, I'll be talking about the year of 2019 in the world of Survivor, both Survivor US and International. Obviously only English language seasons because that's the only language I can understand. So yeah, this year had 4 seasons of Survivor. We had 2 US seasons in Edge of Extinction and Island of the Idols. We had an Australian Survivor season in Champions vs. Contenders 2. And we had a South African season in the Island of Secrets. And through this video, I'll be ranking each of these seasons, talking about the pros and cons of each of these seasons, and talking about the best moments from these seasons, along with the best characters, and also ranking the winners from this year as well. But let's talk about this year as a whole, and it was an okay year. I mean, not great. The US Survivor definitely was a bit rocky this year, and we had some highs, but we had some really low lows. Some of the lowest lows probably in the history of the show. While internationally, I do think we had a pretty good year. Mostly continued on with the success that we got last year from both Australian Survivor and Survivor South Africa. But to get more into the specifics, let's start with the season ranking. Obviously, there are 4 seasons from this year. Let's start off with number 4. So at number 4, my worst season of the year is sadly Survivor, Island of the Idols. And it is obviously the most recent season at this point, so there might be a recency bias here. But overall, I just didn't care for the season. I mean, the season did start off okay. We had some fun in the pre-merge, but the post-merge of the season was particularly weak to me, with the Dan situation, a really predictable winner that just hurt the season as a whole. The Island of the Idols twist itself was really weird. It was essentially just Ghost Island, but with Boston Rob and Sandra there. I mean, it led to some really fun moments, but also led to some really weird advantages and uneven distribution of them. Though pretty much all the visits did lead to at least some good moments. I mean, there were a lot of fun moments from like Nora's and Lauren's and Dean's. We had Vince sneaking into the camp. We had Boston Rob berating Elizabeth for a fire-making challenge. I mean, there was fun to be had from Island of the Idols, but overall, it just wasn't executed as well as I would have liked. The cast was filled with gamers and a wide range of personalities, and I liked most of them. Obviously, Dan withstanding there. But we got fantastic characters here, like Nora, Elaine, Karishma, even a Dean. People like Missy and Aaron were really shrewd gamers. And I feel like the edit of this season really showcased its cast, with a pretty even distribution of content for almost everyone. Even though I do think some people lacked personality on the show, like Tommy and even a Lauren. Pre-merge of the season, though, was pretty strong. I mean, again, I liked the premiere. The 90-minute premiere gave us a good sense of almost everyone in the game. The IOI visit was, again, pretty fun, and we got a very solid blindside in the blind side of Ronnie. Episodes 2 through 4 also include some really fun blindsides as well, where I really loved the Molly blindside. I thought it was particularly well edited. And to see both Vince and Chelsea get blindside idols in their pockets was really fun as well, especially this early on in the season. While the swap episodes sucked, I mean, the following 2 episodes were probably the 2 best episodes of the season. I mean, the Jason boot was fantastic to watch, where we had that 4-4 split on the new Vokai, but Elaine won that block of vote, and this gave us a really fun tribal where we saw the old Vokai freaking out, and especially seeing Tommy freak out is even better in retrospect, obviously, now that we know that pretty easily just dominated the rest of the game. And immediately afterwards, we had Kelly's big move where she hands her idol off to Dean, and Kelly feigning ignorance during the entire thing. Again, it was just really fun to watch. It was a really great section of the season. I remember coming into the merge, I was really excited to see how this season was gonna go. But at the merge, the entire season goes downhill. I mean, despite having what should have been a very fun blindside of Kelly, where she gets taken out with 2 idols in her pocket, the Dan stuff really harms those first 2 post-merge episodes in particular, where, again, it's just uncomfortable to watch. Especially the aftermath, where Janet is being ostracized by her tribe, and Dan is deflecting the topic, and Missy and Elizabeth are feigning ignorance to Dan of the entire thing. I mean, it's just a really tough thing to watch, and it's also a pretty boring stretch of the game as well. I mean, Jamal and Aaron boots were pretty boring. The Missy boot was a bit more interesting, but considering it comprised of only a short portion of that split tribal episode, that obviously didn't last too long. But after that, again, it was very straightforward again, with people like Elizabeth, Karishma, and Elaine going home. Now, obviously, there was some intrigue at points during those rounds, especially the first 2 of those, where while the outcome was underwhelming, we did have the successful idol play from Karishma, even though, again, it just led to a tie vote. And we also had the GOAT Army almost assembling until Dean kind of ruins that. But I still found this entire section of the season to be pretty dry. And then the Dan ejection also left a really sour taste in my mouth coming into the finale. But then we got the finale, and I gotta say, I liked it. I thought it was a pretty good mix of strong gameplay, particularly from Tommy, and really strong character moments from people like Nora and Dean. Obviously, we did get Janet being idol nullified out of the game, which people were upset about, but I was kind of just okay with it, as I didn't find Janet to be a particularly good player on the season anyway. And we get a really fun tribal with a lot of passionate arguing and really good questioning from the jurors. But then we get a Tommy win, which, while he's obviously a very strong winner, it was so well telegraphed and was edited in such a boring fashion that there was no suspense for me by the time of the merge episode. So, I mean, overall, for the season started off pretty well, but became extremely dull and at times uncomfortable during the post-merge. So, despite the Jason boot and the Kelly Idol play, this did really leave a sour taste in my mouth for the season as a whole, though a strong finale definitely makes me have a higher opinion on it than I did right before the finale, though not enough for me to rank it any higher than any other season from this year. So for me, it still lands as the worst season of the year. Alright, for number 3 now. This is going to be an unpopular opinion. I already know that, because I think for most people, this is the best season of the year. But for me, there's just something missing about it, and that is Australian Survivor Champions versus Contenders 2. And I like the season. I like the season. It's just I never agreed with all the hype around it. And as time has gone by, I just feel like it was a pretty average season overall. I mean, I just feel like it was a very middle-of-the-road season. I mean, just not much of it really stuck with me, nearly as much as the other 2 seasons we'll be talking about. But let's talk about the season. Again, the cast is your typical Australian Survivor fare. I mean, where there are some all-time great characters within the cast, but there's also a whole bunch of complete duds. I literally know nothing about people like Sam and Hannah and Susie and Casey and Simon. But as I said, there are some great characters here. I mean, Luke is one of the best characters in the history of Survivor as a whole. David is another great character, which him at the Survivor Theater is probably my favorite scene of the entire season. Harry had some fun moments as well with his fake sun lie. Janine, Abby, Daisy, John, Sean, Andy, Ross, they all had their moments, but also almost every pre-merge boot was a complete dud. Now, that isn't to say that the pre-merge was bad, because it was actually pretty strong. I actually think it was the strongest part of the season. I mean, the first couple episodes were a solid introduction to the better characters of the season, but it wasn't until episode 3 that we had a fantastic blindside of the Sporty 7. But after that, we did get, again, some pretty straightforward boots until the swap. But during this time, we had that really fun storyline between David and Sean, where Sean finds the champion's idol, and David's able to get Sean to give him the idol while he gives Sean a fake idol, which is an all-time great moment for the show. But then we get to the swap, which was where the season picked up a bit, where Luke and David found themselves on the outs, and it was really fun to watch them crawl their way out and blindside Sam. But again, after that, the next couple episodes are a bit slower again until Sean is stolen by the other tribe, leading to a battle between him and David. And a trial where Hannah goes home is really great. One of the best episodes of the season. Probably one of the best tribals in the history of International Survivor. Being a really complicated vote where Andy is trying to blindside Daisy, but also at the same time flush David and Luke's idols. And while it's definitely would have been better with a Sean or Daisy boot, which almost happened, it's still a high point for the season. And again, another string of pretty boring episodes where the other tribe goes to tribal and the champions stick together, so there really wasn't much there. Harry only survives due to him using 2 idols in a row, and then Ross gets medevac, which sucks as he was a pretty fun background character on the season. And then we get to the merge, which I found pretty disappointing after the contenders just couldn't stick together at that first vote. And instead of a 6v6 battle, we got a unanimous Andy boot. And while I do think the subsequent Sean boot was well edited, it was still pretty predictable. And I feel like the David blindside should have been this big epic moment for the season, but the editing was so heavy-handed that it became very obvious that it was going to happen. But then we get another pretty strong episode where Daisy finds an idol and could have made a game-changing move, getting the champions and contenders back to even, but instead she misplays it and She gets taken out the next tribal anyway, and then we get another decent boot where Luke and Abby flip against the other champions and take out Simon, only for Simon to come back the very next episode anyway and then get voted out again, which was a really boring episode. And right after this, Janine gets taken out as well, but then we have another of the season's highs, and probably the best episode of the post-merge where Luke becomes the target but after he wins immunity and also finds an advantage to send someone back to camp at Tribal. He sends Baden back to camp, teams up with Pia, and convinces Abby to flip on Harry, causing a 2-1 vote where Abby gets taken out, which is a fantastic move from Luke and a really fun one to watch. Obviously, he was able to get rid of one of his strongest competition threats and also blatantly making a big move in front of the jury, even though it was all for naught, even as he just gets taken out the next episode, which I know many people found this episode to be like very gut-wrenching and everything, with like Luke being taken out and everyone crying and everything. I mean, I found it pretty boring. Again, Luke was pretty clearly the boot after he didn't win immunity, and while, it was a very emotional episode, it wasn't one that I enjoyed watching. But this does lead the way for Pia to win the game, and I think Pia is a pretty good winner, especially for Australian Survivor, playing a pretty quintessential Australian Survivor game of never being the front runner until the very end of the game, still having strong connections throughout the season to win a jury vote. But my problem with her win is that it was so blatantly telegraphed from the very beginning of the season. I never really had any doubt in my mind that she was going to be the winner of the season. I feel like that's another factor into why I didn't love the season as much as I should have. So overall, Australian Survivors Champions vs. Contenders 2 was a good season, but it had an array of issues. The mostly lopsided editing, the repetitiveness of the confessionals, the mixed bag of a cast, decent amount of boring boots, but there was a really game-savvy cast that made a good chunk of big moves. But for me, it just really didn't stick to my mind. It's really a season that I have difficulty thinking of a lot of the moments from this season. So because of that, it gets nearly edged out by my number 2 season of the year. So now at number 2, I have a season that I know a lot of people dislike. A lot of people really bash on this season, and I did too at the time. However, I think as time has gone on, I've really grown an appreciation for it, and that is Survivor Edge of Extinction. And for me, the Edge of Extinction doesn't ruin the season. I know a lot of people think it does, and a lot of people, me included, think it's one of the worst twists in the history of the show, but I do still think it provides us with a lot of entertainment. I actually liked it as a portion of the show. I like some of the dynamics that we saw there. Even though it did take up a good amount of screen time that made it so that we didn't get to know a lot of people on the main cast, I just enjoyed getting to see people like Reem and Keith, who were fun characters that just got taken out really early. Now, from a gameplay standpoint, obviously I hate it. I hate it when people come back into the game, especially at the end of the game. I don't mind the twist as a whole, especially in the pre-merge. I mean, I think it was a fun dynamic in the pre-merge, a lot of fun characters, and to have someone come back into the game at the final 13 isn't that bad, in my opinion. But to have it also be in the post-merge was ridiculous. I mean, it was too broken. It was too big of an advantage for the person that returned. I just simply didn't like it. I do think the cast of the season, though, even though I don't think a lot of them got the screen time they deserved, I do think they were good characters. We got people like Rick, Ron, War Dog, Wendy, Reem. I mean, Kelly and David were pretty big factors on this season as well. But there were some people that did make it decently far that I know nothing about. People like Julia and Eric. I mean, Joe had nothing to do on this season. Even Gavin, who almost won the game, got pretty minimal screen time. And because of that, I do feel like the editing of the season was a complete mess. I do think the season started off well with Reem being a pretty traditional first boot, but a really fun one in that. And I did like the Edge of Extinction reveal. The following episodes were solid as well, with the Chris boot being a pretty fun round, and the post swap was pretty solid all around as well. Even though I found the Rick boot to be pretty boring. After that, we had the Aubrey blindside, which was really fun to watch, and the joint tribal was a great round as well. But then we get to the merge, which I feel like is where the editing gets the sloppiest. I mean, we get some pretty mediocre episodes there that, despite some interesting results, like the Eric blindside, we do get some dropped storylines from earlier on in the season that I just found really strange. Obviously, the final 11 tribal, where everyone's out of their seats, having private conversations, and is a really fun tribal. I think it's one that has grown on me as time has moved on. I've kind of rewatched it multiple times, and there's a lot of fun character moments from that tribal. It is really great to watch, even though there is a very lackluster result in Julia being a near unanimous boot. I feel like the season does reach its peak at the Kelly Wentworth boot, which was probably the most exciting vote off of the season, where she gets taken out in a 5-4 vote with an idol in her pocket. But from this round on, it is the Rick show. It's essentially, is Rick gonna win or not from this point on, where Rick is the clear target and has the win immunity or play an idol to save himself, and he does at round after round after round. And I think the Ron boot's a particularly interesting one of those rounds, and it was a pretty solid episode as well. But this leads up to the finale, and the finale for me, I know a lot of people disagree, but for me, it's an all-time great finale. I mean, where we have Chris re-enter the game, and to watch him play his ass off from that point on and win the game is really one of the most surprising winners in the history of the show, and was really riveting to me. I think the final 6 round is very fun, where Chris convinces Lauren to play her idol on him, wasting her idol that she needed the very next round, and also gets rid of Victoria, the biggest threat in the game outside of Rick Devens at that point. Final 5 was a very fun round, where Rick had 2 fake idols hidden and Julie and Lauren found them each. And we have Chris being able to convince Rick to give his half idol back, allowing him to survive that round. And us having a really fun tribal where we have 2 fake idols being played followed by 2 real ones, and having the jury reactions to those are really great as well. Then we get to the final 4, where we have Chris give up immunity to challenge Rick Devens in fire making, which was also really thrilling to watch. So while having someone who is barely on the season win the season can be looked at as pretty disappointing, I feel like Chris did the best he could with the time he had and made this finale one of the best in the history of the show. Overall, though, this season is a season of really high highs and some low lows. But for me, those high highs do rank it above those previous 2 seasons. I know people might disagree. People don't like Edge of Extinction. But this is a season that I've actually gone back and rewatched scenes from over and over again. I really love the final 6 tribal, the final 5 tribal, the Kelly Wentworth boot, Chris making fire, Aubrey blindside, the joint tribal, Reem on Edge of Extinction. There's so many great things within this season that do get harmed by Edge of Extinction, but for me, that wasn't bad enough for me to rank it below those other 2 seasons. And for me, overall, this season has gone up since I've done my season ranking video. When I did my season ranking video, I was still pretty low on the season. I considered it a bottom tier season. I do think at this point for me, I've moved it up into the middle tier. It's still not a particularly high ranking season in the grand scheme of Survivor, but it's a season that I do have a lot more respect for now than I did at the time. But now on to the number 1 season of the year, which for me is a season that I know a lot of people won't agree with, but it is Survivor South Africa Island of Secrets. And for me, this season has just stuck with me, and I really don't know why. I mean, it's a season that a lot of people didn't like. It was a very dark season. It had a very dominant winner. But like Edge of Extinction, it's a season that I've gone back to multiple times. I just watch certain scenes over and over and over again. It's a season that does really stick out to my mind. And I think because of that, while it is a frustrating season at points, it just made this season super memorable to me. For me, it's a very raw season. Unlike Australian Survivor, which one of my biggest issues with Australian Survivor is I feel like it's very manufactured. It feels like production is making up a story instead of the story itself just being told to us. Island of Secrets just feels like a more genuine season. It feels like a real story. I feel like a lot of the credit here has to go to the production team. I feel like the season as a whole, again, isn't the greatest in the world. It's still a middle tier season, by the way. Even though this is my favorite season of the year, it's still a middle tier season. But I feel like what really makes it stand out to me is, again, how production put together this season. Out of all the production teams that make Survivor at this point, I have the most confidence in Survivor South Africa to make a season made for the fans. That being said, I don't love the Island of Secrets twist. It's just another like Ghost Island or Island of the Idols or Outpost sort of twist that, again, feels very arbitrary as the format changes pretty much every episode. I do like the cast as a whole. There are a good amount of gamers here. Most of them were fun characters as well. Again, Rob is obviously an all-time great Survivor player. Nicole was a solid player as well. They had a really fun set of character moments with a really fantastic way of talking where she would just add gravitas to really anything she would say. Doral is one of the doofiest characters in the history of the series. Mike and Jock were really solid players as well that were just, they were simply outplayed. Cobus, Dante, Cipe, Jeffrey, Meryl, Nathan, Tanya, even Rocco, all of those people had their moments on the show. Now, there are obviously a few people that are left behind by the edit, but not nearly to the extent of something you would find on Australian Survivor. The season did have its highs and lows, though. The premiere was pretty strong with some really fun dynamics on each of the tribes, and we also had a last-second change at Tribal, which is similar to what happened in episode 2 as well, where Paul gets taken out with Rob getting to keep his idol for himself. Episode 3 was great, where Jacques makes that massive blunder and wasting his idol on himself instead of saving Ting Ting, leading to her, his closest ally, going home, and him ruining the relationships with everyone else on his tribe, even though he does end up getting saved by the swap, obviously. And at the swap, we do get a pretty boring episode, but the following episode after that was pretty fun, where Nathan tries to throw immunity and fails at it. Meryl gets to find the idol that episode, and we have some fun interactions between her and Dante. And we also get the downfall of Felix, which was fun to watch as well. But eventually we get to the second swap, which was kind of dull. The Rocco boot was pretty well telegraphed. But the following Nathan boot was a pretty massive blindside where he gets betrayed by Nicole. And it's really a move that was completely against the best interest of the people that made it. But then we get to the merge, and from this point on, Rob dominates. He dominates the game itself, but he also dominates the screen time, where he is far and away the top confessional getter of the season, which I do think is for the better of the season, where he has complete control of the game, but because of this, he also gets to show how he controlled the game. He was able to do it in a really fascinating way for me to watch. He really gets his way every single tribal up until the very end of the game. And while it does get a bit rocky at points, it was fantastic watching a player of his magnitude work and make plenty of impressive moves, like getting Cipe to give her idol back to Nicole, only to blindside her that very night, and making up a lie about a power at the Island of Secrets that made it impossible for anyone to execute a blindside against him. He was also able to get the right people at the right times, getting rid of Meryl and Jeffrey and Dante and Maba, all at the right times. Building a relationship with Doral and his maintenance of that relationship was fantastic for me to watch, where it allowed for Doral to be the perfect GOAT, while also having Doral relay all of the blindside plans to him. The Maba boot was a really fun blindside as well, where Jacques plays his idol before the vote, and for some reason, Maba and Mike still vote for him. And Maba also finds an idol at that tribal, only for her to not play it, despite her being one of the few people that weren't in the majority. And I really love the endgame of this season. Everything from the second half of episode 16 on is some of the best Survivor I've watched all year. The episode starts with the family visit, which, who cares, but what I do love is that Final 6 tribal, which is one of the funniest tribals ever. Probably my favorite tribal of the season, where everything starts from Rob straight up telling Mike that he's going home. And this causes Mike and Doral to realize what's really going on in the game. And for Doral to have all these revelations during this tribal and slowly figuring things out, it's so funny to me. And then the penultimate episode of this season was fantastic as well, where Steffi, Letitia, and Nicole are ready to blindside Rob. It looks like he might be blindsided without using his idol at the final tribal that he can use it, but then he wins immunity and ruins that plan, and it looks like Doral is going to be the early boot, as obviously Rob, Nicole, and Letitia all have idols. But what makes this round particularly interesting was that Nicole, out of nowhere, decides to flip on Steffi and side with Rob, telling Rob about everything. And by the time we get to tribal, we have Nicole playing her idol for Doral, Rob playing his idol for Nicole, and Letitia playing the idol for herself in self-preservation mode, and essentially Steffi is taken out by default. And this is such a great blindside with so many great character moments going on during this scene as well. The final tribal was probably the best of the year, even though, I Am the Idols was pretty close, but I do think this one was pretty great. The spectacle of watching the individual jury members roasting the final 3 was really fun. And I really love the original format for the final tribal council. It's sad that we don't see it on any other version of Survivor anymore. but I enjoyed it here. I really love Rob's final speech where he brilliantly explains his game, which was really needed as he did a pretty poor job at Final Tribal up until that point. But I will also say I think Nicole did a pretty good job as well, and because of that, we get a really close vote where I thought Nicole at one point was going to win, but instead we obviously get the Rob win, which was a very satisfying ending to the season. Overall, again, this season's still a mixed bag. It is my favorite season of the year, but it's not perfect. There's a long streak of boring votes in the post-merge, but with a fun pre-merge and a really solid endgame, probably my favorite endgame of the year, it was a lot of fun to watch Rob dominate the game, and his level of gameplay was just far and above what I've seen in Survivor in a while. So I do like this season much more than other people, and it ranks here for me at number 1. So that's every season of the year. To wrap up this video, I might as well rank the winners of the year as well, and it's not that tough. I mean, obviously at number 4, I would put Chris Underwood. He gets voted out and comes back in. I mean, it's really that simple. At number 3, I would have Pia, who played a pretty standard middle tier winner game for me. She didn't dominate the season she was on, but she also was a second in command for a good chunk of the season. While she does end up in the minority at points, her game was very solid, just not very dominant. The top 2 are a bit tougher here, where they're both top tier winners, but at number 2, I have Tommy. And again, he dominated the game, but I don't think he was out in front as much as my number 1 winner. But I do think Tommy had a stronger end game, and his non-use of idols or advantages or immunity challenge is very impressive to me. But for me, Rob has to be number 1. Again, one of the most dominant wins I've ever seen. Like, he has complete control of the game from the second swap on. His endgame gets a bit messy, but he still had the loyalty of Darao and Nicole to get him through it. The level of control that he demonstrated is nearly unprecedented, so for me, he's easily the best winner of the year. So that pretty much wraps up this year in Survivor. Went through every English language season of Survivor this year. Overall, I mean, a pretty mediocre year of Survivor. Again, we had 4 middle to bottom tier seasons of Survivor, with none of them really blowing me away. It was definitely a weaker year than 2018, which did have David vs. Goliath, Survivor South Africa Philippines, 2 top tier seasons. We had Survivor New Zealand, Thailand, and Champions vs. Contenders 1, which were 2 middle tier seasons, and we had a bad season in Ghost Island. But again, that was pretty much an outlier there. But despite this year being a pretty weak year for seasons, I do think we got a good chunk of good characters that I would like to see in future seasons of all these series, and some really fantastic gameplay that was fun to watch. But there we go, that is my final video for the year, leading us into 2020, which should be a really fun year for Survivor. We have Winners at War, we have Australian Survivor All-Stars, along with another Australian Survivor season coming later in the year. We have Survivor South Africa Season 8. We have Survivor 41. Next year is going to be a big year for Survivor, and I'm really excited to cover it all. But that's it for 2019. That is my review for this year in Survivor. Thank you for watching.